Hello and welcome to Express Sports Podcast for a very special episode of Game Time with me, Mihir Vasavda. Joining me as always is my co-host Amit Kamath, and in the house today is Andrew Amsan. But it's not about us today. We are joined by Commonwealth Games bronze medalist high jumper who is also a national record holder, Tejaswin Shankar. Tejaswin has transitioned from being just a high jumper to also being a decathlete who can be called as the all-rounders of athletics. He recently won the title at the Interstate Championships in Bhubaneswar and thus qualified for the Asian Games in Hangzhou. But before that, he'll also be competing at the Asian Championships in Bangkok. Before we move to Tejaswin, यार अमित हम एक चीज करने में इतना I wouldn't say we are, but we are bad at doing one thing. And here are athletes who pull off 10 things in 2 days and are pretty decent at it, I must say.
Mihir, first of all, thank you for trying not to make that personal. I thought that was a personal attack.
I mean, we are all in it together.
But let's move past that. I'd just like to contextualize what the decathlon is. Essentially, the decathlon is a punishing combination of like 10 events held over 2 days at any event. The first day, there are the 100-meter sprint, the long jump, shot put, high jump, 400-meter sprints in that order. And on the second day, decathletes start with 110-meter hurdles, go to discus throw, switch to the pole vault, then compete in the javelin throw. And well, if that's not exhausting enough, they will round it off with a nice, calming 1,500-meter sprint. It's a sport that perfectly sums up the Olympic motto of faster, higher, stronger. And perhaps it's fitting that we are doing this interview on World Olympic Day, that is June 23rd.
Absolutely. So basically, it's an emblem of an all-round athlete. If there was an all-rounder in track and field, it is the decathletes. Andrew Amsan has seen Tejaswin very closely, his high jump career, and now his transition into a decathlete. Andrew, you saw Tejaswin at Interstate, and you wrote a very nice detailed copy with very tiny details ki kya ho raha tha on field. Just as someone who's watching decathlon, how different is it compared to other events in athletics? And then you kind of bring Tejaswin right in. He's been patiently listening to all our blabbering so far.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll still keep my job after telling this, but usually when I go to decathlon events, I just really don't care of what they are doing. We'll be there in the field and someone say, "Yeah, high jump is happening," but then like, "Arey, ye to decathlon wale hain. Acha, chhod. We'll probably move on." So, anyways, so right now, but when Tejaswin was competing, that's what the change was. Like even when he was doing his pole vault in like sweltering heat, probably 12 in the sun. Like under the really harsh, humid conditions, there were not only journalists, there were other athletes, coaches who wanted to watch this. So in a way, apologies for not probably covering decathlon as more sincerely as I should. But yeah. So again, what I saw in the 2 days, I mean, the contrast, I mean, you just say it's one event, but there are 10 different disciplines. And honestly, I feel, I mean, you just can't compare a pole vault to, let's say, a discus throw or a javelin throw. Like, it's just amazing. And it's like an experience. Like, let's say, test cricket followers say, test cricket is an experience. You're there for 5 days. The same ways when you are probably following a decathlon event, it's an experience. Like, it was fun. Like, you're with the athletes. Like, after every event, you're calculating the points. And even I think, you carry a calculator?
First of all, thank you so much for having me here. And I think you touched on a lot of points, but then to answer your immediate question, it's not a normal calculator, but then there's this thing called a decathlon calculator where you just put it online. You say decathlon calculator, and for every performance, you just input your performance and it spits out a relevant score for each performance. And then the total of those scores is your total cumulative score. So the other day somebody asked me, यार आपने 10 इवेंट में क्यों आए, एक ही कर लेते, 10 मेडल तो मिलते नहीं है आपको. ये बात तो ठीक है, क्यों इतनी मेहनत कर रहा हूँ मैं 10 इवेंट करने के लिए. But then I guess to sum it up, it's just the feeling of satisfaction that you get after Mihir ji correctly said that the last event in the decathlon is the 1500. Once you run the 1500, you could have had the worst decathlon of your life, but you feel satisfied that, okay, I couldn't have done anything better in the last 2 days. So that feeling of satisfaction, I think, is paramount, and that's why everybody who does the decathlon does it.
So I just have like one question before Mihir takes over. So when we first realized that you are doing decathlon, initially probably it was for fitness or probably because off season you just had to do other events. But then when you actually said I'm going to pursue decathlon for genuinely very seriously, a lot of people might have like ye kya kar raha hai types, including me. So what made you really fall in love or like really pursue the discipline so intently? Yeah.
I think to begin with, when I went to the US for academics as well as sports, back in 2017, or I believe in 2016 was the first time I jumped 2 meters and 26, which was the national record at that time in the high jump. So since that year till 2023, even this year, so every year I've jumped over 225 multiple times without getting that elusive 230 meter barrier, which अभी तो पूरी दुनिया नीरज के पीछे पड़ी कि 90 मीटर कब करोगे, मेरे पीछे मैं अकेला ही पड़ रहा था कि 230 कब होगी, and I was still feeling the heat and the pressure of jumping 2 meters and 30. At that point, I didn't realize that, the growth is never a linear curve. It's always, up and down. There's always going to be a time when you have to do it, when things might click and it happens. But then you still have to do your training. You still have to go through the process. So your focus should be on the process. But at that time, my focus was how and when will I jump 2 meters and 30 centimeters. So in my first year, I came very close. I jumped 2 meters and 29. My second year in university, I jumped over 225 multiple times, got to 227, knocked on the doors of 230 multiple times, but never cleared the bar. So the coach's perspective was at the end of the season, he's like, you will jump it eventually. Don't make that the monkey on your back that, hey, you have to jump 2 meters and 30. It will eventually happen. But then I started, didn't enjoy training as much because I just felt like I had so much energy, didn't know where to use it. And then he said, okay, you know what? If you feel like you're not training at a high level, we can do multiple events in order to channel your energy properly. And then eventually we can come back into the high jump because that's all going to help you in the high jump. And that's how I started doing individual events. And eventually it all clicked. And I didn't know, sooner or later, I just drifted away from the high jump, knowing that whenever I come back, if I took a 3-week break from the high jump, I still ended up jumping 225. If I took a 1-month break from the high jump, I'd still come back and jump 225. So I felt like, okay, 225 is never going to leave me. So I might eventually go and, explore out and then come back. So that's how my journey into the multiple events started. And then in my last year in university, I realized that, okay, I want to do multiple things. I think that's where my passion lies. And then I just drifted away from the high jump into the multiple events. So that's the beginning of the journey. I think we'll talk more about this as we get asked different questions.
Right. In Tejaswin, we eventually will move on to an event-wise breakdown of decathlon and understand what goes in mentally, physically in your body while you're shifting from one event to another. But before we go that, you mentioned a decathlon calculator. So, abhi jab aap events ke liye jaate ho, so what all do you have to carry in your bag? Like we saw a photo of you carrying pole vaults on the top of your car. I'm sure there are like 100 of the equipments which you never really bothered about earlier. So, what does an decathlete's bag look like when he's traveling for a tournament?
तो कैलकुलेटर तो फोन में ही होता है तो वो अलग से लेके जाना नहीं पड़ता. आई गेस स्मार्टफोन के एडवांटेजेस ये होते हैं. बट आउटसाइड ऑफ दैट, व्हेन आई यूज्ड टू गो फॉर हाई जंप कंपटीशन, द ओनली थिंग आई वुड बी वरीड अबाउट वाज I need my pair of spikes, I need my shorts, जो भी clothing उस दिन पहन रहा हूँ, I need my bib number. On top of that, in the decathlon, you have 10 different spikes, right? You're in the field for 2 days, so you have to make sure that I personally carry stuff to fuel myself during the competition, so protein bars and things that I can eat in the middle of the competition. Every decathlete has वो कहते हैं ना टोटका होता है. So every decathlete has a totka to avoid cramping, because cramping is the biggest problem that everybody faces during decathlon because you're there for 2 days in whatever kind of weather condition you'll have at that point. So I carry pickle juice. कई लोग होते हैं pickle juice के short होते हैं, उसको you just have to drink it, chug it because it's highly concentrated in sodium. So the idea is कि sodium होगा तो then you'll stop cramping. I carry mustard, Dijon mustard with me. Raw mustard को event के बीच में खाता हूँ ताकि I don't cramp. There's no scientific study behind it. Is all passed along over generation के ये होगा तो इससे क्रैम्पिंग नहीं होगी, वो होगा तो इससे क्रैम्पिंग नहीं होगी. साइंस किसी को नहीं पता किससे होगी नहीं होगी, लेकिन रूल ये मतलब डिस्कस में ऐसे होता है. This is a funny story. So in my first decathlon, after day 1, I'm a heavy cramper. I cramp a lot. So after day 1, I'm starting to feel my cramping, pick up again. तो कोच ने बोला कि एक काम करो, रात को जो होता है ना कि सोप जो होता है, जो नहाने का सोप होता है, उसको हाथ पैर में लगा के टाइट्स पहन के सो जाओ बिना धोए. I was like, well, what's the science behind it? तो उसने बोला कि नहीं, उसमें बाइकार्बोनेट होता है तो इसीलिए वो बेसिक होता है तो उससे तुम्हें क्रैम्प नहीं आएगा. तो मैं उस दिन रात को पूरा लगा के सोया and I didn't get a cramp. So what did I do from then on? I've been putting soap on me every time I do a decathlon. After day 1, I make sure I soap myself without washing and then I go to bed. अब हो गया तो फिर वो करना है ना उसको, अदरवाइज अगली बार क्रैम्प हो तो वो मुझे बोलेगा कि तुमने सोप लगाया नहीं लगाया. So I don't know if it's placebo or not, but if it is, then I'm going to have to do it so that I don't cramp. तो ऐसे ऐसे सबके अलग अलग वो होते हैं. So there's so many things that we carry. Javelins हो गए, discus हो गया. You have to carry your own shot, but poles of course are very individualistic to each human being. So there's just so many things that you have to carry. So the planning for the decathlon starts way before the actual decathlon, at least 5-6 days prior. You have 2 suitcases, you have your poles. So a lot of things we carry in our bag.
Tejaswin, now we'll just move on to the specific disciplines. We want to start with the first discipline that comes, 100 meter. How do you kind of prepare for that? I mean, it's maybe the simplest of the 10 because it's just one sprint. But what kind of things do you have to do in the backdrop? Who helps you work on the 100-meter sprint?
Even before the 100, I think let's just go a little bit back and understand the decathlon as a whole before we get into each event. So whenever we train for the decathlon, when I like to look at the decathlon from a very, macro perspective, what I think of is there's this philosophy called the 3 C's of combined events. The 3 C's entail, you have this thing called commonalities, you have this thing called compatibility, and then you have this thing called complementaries. So commonality in training, or I guess commonality in events is, let's say, for example, in all 3 throws, you have the discus, you have the javelin, and you have the shot put. In all 3 throws, someone might glide in the shot put, everybody turns in the discus, everybody runs and throws a javelin, but then the power position right before the throw is exactly the same in all 3 throws. So that's the common aspect of the throws that we train. Doesn't matter what implement you have in your hand, you have to have that awareness of, okay, I have 60% of my body weight in my right leg, which is my leg that's going to produce the throw, and then the block leg is my left leg, irrespective of throw. That proportion has to be maintained. You have to think of it that way. Next step is we look at compatibility in training. So compatibility is what events or, what things go with each other. So for example, you take a day off on Sunday, right? From a training perspective, you'll never do a tempo running session on Monday because you want to do something that's more neuromuscularly taxing. You want to do a sprint activity. You want to do something that takes a lot of your body awareness, like high jump or pole vault. That might be something that you might do first on that given day because it's technically demanding, or sprints, for example, that's physically demanding. A tempo running session you can do at the end of the day because just like the 1500, you're going to be fatigued with the week's training load, and then you do it at the end of the week just to get through it. And then finally, if you look at the complementary aspect of training, you look at events that are very similar to each other. So let's say, for example, the hurdles and the long jump are very similar because the last 3 steps in the hurdles is very similar to the last 3 steps in the long jump. So those are some things that we look at before training to put together events, because ultimately you have 10 events, but you only have 6 days in a week if you take 1 day off, right? So you don't want to overdo it. At the same time, you want to make sure that you touch everything to the point where it's enough and not overkill. So that's how we plan training. That's from a macro nutshell. Now coming back to your question of, okay, how do you warm up right before the 100 meters? So that's when you have to understand that the 100 is the first event of the day. So you just can't just warm up for the 100, but you have to warm up for the other 5 also. So you do some sort of a general warm up where you do your normal jogging and stretching and all that sort of thing, get your body weight, body temperature up, get your, limber down, all that sort of thing. So you do those things before you start warming up for the 100, which for me usually is, doing some blocks, doing some resisted sprints, just getting myself primed and ready and activated just before the race. But what I learned in Bhubaneswar was, I think I have to accustom to the Indian weather, get used to it before I do all these things, because I had my checklist out. I did everything. Right before I sat in the block, I realized that my nose was bleeding. So I overkilled it. So I did too much. So I had to adapt on the go, figure out what I had to do next. Because once you do that big warm up before the 100, you don't have to do a lot for every event. You don't have to come and, do a big lengthy warm up before the long jump shot. But all you got to do is do a couple run throughs and you just go and compete. So that's a different mindset altogether. And that's how I warm up right before the 100 meters to get myself set for the whole day's proceedings.
Yeah. So it's just when we wanted to understand, we do understand that bit, but then how do you kind of train for the 100? Who helps you? Is there a coach specifically? And at some point, we'd also like to know if you have 10 specific coaches for 10 disciplines.
So the way I like to look at it is you don't really need 10 coaches for 10 events, because ultimately the architect has to be one. There's only going to be one coach who knows or who's going to plan out when to do what and in how much proportion, which is the prescription of workout. There's only one coach who's going to tell you when to do what and how much. There's going to be individual coaches for individual events who have their own specialties, who might help you with looking at your technique and be like, okay, this is not something that you could do, or aap aise kar sakte ho, waise kar sakte ho. But then there's only going to be one coach which I have who helps me with the planning of the workout, to tell me, okay, aaj se agar 3 mahine mein Asian Games hai, so what do I need to do tomorrow or in 1 week, so that, we are on the same page, everybody's on the same page. Then there's individual coaches who can help. That being said, again, going back to my 3 C's of combined events, something like 100 can be paired very easily with the long jump approach run, which can be paired very easily with the 400 meters. So what we do is we never train really extensively for the 100, but for the 400, because the 400 covers the 100 and the long jump approach drill that we do, because we don't jump in every practice, right? So when we do long jump approaches, that covers the 100 meter as well as the 110 meter hurdles. जब आप 110 meters के start करते हो, that's very, for me, it's the exact same as the 100 meter start. So I don't really have to spend a lot of time training for the 100. That's how we eliminate events, so to say, that we don't really train for. Another good example is the 1500. I never train for the 1500, and a lot of the decathletes that I've talked to, they never train for the 1500, because if you look at it scientifically, अगर आप एक spectrum लें, उसमें one end of it is type A fibered athletes, which are marathon runners. The other end is type 2 fibered athletes, which is somebody like a Usain Bolt who's very explosive. So if 9 events in the decathlon is explosive and towards the type 2, then why would you train that one event and bring yourself in the middle of the spectrum जहाँ पे आपके बाकी 9 भी खराब हो रहे हैं? The 1500 is all about winging it. You just want to get through it, but then you still have the other 9 that you really have to worry about. So that's how we branch events and break those up, so that we don't have to worry about 10, but I guess 6 or 7 individually, so that it all combines together, and then ultimately it's all about putting those 10 together when it matters. So we don't really train for all 10 every week.
So yeah, after your 100 meters, then there's a long jump. Is it an ideal event right after 100 meters? Also, you're very good friends with the previous national record holder and also the Commonwealth silver medalist Suresh Shankar. So, कुछ tips लिया है?
I think to answer your first question, long jumps, I personally think is the perfect event right after the 100, because they're extremely similar. 100, you have to run in a straight line. Long jump, you have to run in a straight line and jump at the end of it. So very similar. Think of the 100 as a warm up for the long jump, so to say. तो वो उस तरीके से अच्छा लगता है. And then I think long jump is also one of my stronger events, where if I can get it on the board right, I can jump far. तो उस respect से I really like the long jump. But then the bad aspect of the long jump is you only get 3 jumps. और अगर आपने पहली या 2 miss हो गई, foul हो गया, तो you just have one opportunity, and then the whole decathlon will go for a toss if you miss all 3 in the long jumps, which happened to Kevin Myers in the European Championships, जो world record holder है आज की डेट में फ्रांस से. तो ऐसे बहुत लोगों के साथ होता है. So with that respect, it's one of the tougher events. But श्री शंकर से, जो मेरे बहुत अच्छे दोस्त हैं, उनसे मैंने अभी लॉन्ग जंप के बारे में इतना पूछा नहीं है, क्योंकि उनका टेक्निक भी अलग है और उनका सब कुछ अलग है. मेरा बहुत सिंपल है. I just jump, take off and sail. He does a lot of hitch kicking and all that sort of thing. Definitely think I can pick a thing or two, but I love watching his videos. अभी जो इंटरस्टेट में उनकी वीडियो थी, वो भी देख के मेरी बहन ने यही बोला था कि भैया आपकी जंप तो इतनी छोटी सी लगती है, उसको देखो उड़ रहा है हवा में, वैसे कुछ नहीं कर सकते क्या? मैं कहा चलो करूंगा, एक दिन होगा तो. So yeah, I love watching the long jump as well.
Tejaswin, long jump and 100 meters ka you at least have some kind of a flow like you're mentioning. But then you move to an event jahan par I think strength is much more needed. So how do you kind of move to short put then? Because again, if I understand properly, I think, I don't know if you have to change your spikes when you go from 100 to long jump, but then do you use the same spikes, if, for example, when you go to short put? What's the muscle group that you have to activate? Because also short put we see generally stereotype shayad ho jayega, but you see like a kind of big, thoda sa heavy built men doing it, and you aren't, fitting in that type. So how do you kind of balance all of that?
So like you said, I mean, there's going to be 10 events. तो हर event के physicalities और physical aspect attributes different होंगे. High jumper आपको अलग दिखेगा compared to 100 meter sprinter who will look way different than a short put guy. I guess that's what the beauty of the sport is in the decathlon, where you have to make sure that you're good in each event. And, a lot of people, Ashton Eaton, for example, who was the ex-world record holder on the decathlon, said that it's not important how many points you score, but it's important how you learn where to give up points. So to put that into further perspective, like an event like the short put, someone like me, I have long levers, long arms, but I know that the high jump is where my biggest gain for points is going to come from. So if I spend a lot of time bulking up and, looking like a short putter, currently I'm throwing whatever 13, 14 meters. Let's say, for example, I can get really strong and end up throwing 16 meters. How much am I gaining compared to me jumping 220, 225 in a decathlon? And if I put on another 20 pounds, I'm going to get that down to 215, 210, where I'm going to lose so many more points, because we have to realize that not each event is evenly placed when it comes to points. The throws have lesser points compared to the pole vault, or say, for example, the high jump, or, the sprints. और वहाँ पे improve करने की भी chances ज़्यादा हैं, and then points भी ज़्यादा हैं. So that's why in today's world, in today's decathlon, you see somebody like a Damien Warner, you see somebody like a Kevin Meyer, who are really fast, explosive guys running 10-1, 10-2 in the 100, running low 13s in the 110 hurdles, jumping over 8 meters. Those are the kind of guys who, are really successful in today's world, compared to the guys who are throwing 18, 19 meters in the short, or, throwing over 60 meters in the disc. ऐसा कोई decathlete उस जमाने में होते थे, अब तो कोई होता नहीं है. So coming back to the shot put, I think for me it's really important to get that ball which is already 7.5 kilos, like you said, mass move mass. So मेरा मास है ही नहीं तो मैं किसको मूव करूंगा. So I have to really rely on the technical aspect of it, and I think of shot put as an event where I can catch my breath after 100 and long jump. तो वहां मैं थोड़ी सांस अपनी लेता हूँ और मतलब चलो I just have to get through it. If I can get anywhere close to 14 meters, over 13 meters, that's my goal for the shot put. That's all I think about. So once that's out of the way, usually you get a rest period of about a few hours, but then sometimes it's just a continuous, okay, move on to the high jump. But अगर rest मिलता है तो then I know कि चलो morning session अच्छा हुआ and I just go back, recover, rest, and then come back for the high jump, which I'm sure we'll talk about next.
Right. And after that, obviously comes the high jump, which I don't know how. I mean, you have to even train for that, or how naturally, obviously, does that come for you, and how much of an advantage does that give you?
So high jump is definitely my stronger event, one of my stronger events, and I mean, you still have to train for it, right? So. But from a decathlon perspective, there's also strategy that goes behind the high jump, especially for someone like me, because let's say two scenarios. One is a scenario like the interstate where you had, 3 hours of, or whatever, 4 hours of break after the shot put before the high jump, which is how championship meets are held. Championship meets में एक morning session होता है, एक evening session होता है जहाँ पे TV दिखता है. Morning session में कोई नहीं देखता आपको, तो फिर heats होते हैं वहाँ पे, तो ऐसे करके होता है. But in, backyard decathlons like what I did in the United States, वहाँ पे आपके पांचों इवेंट आधे घंटे के गैप में वो लोग साथ में चलाते रहते हैं. So those are the two scenarios. Let's say, for example, something like the interstate. I have 3-4 hours to recover after the shot. So that's when I have to do another intensive warm-up right before the high jump, because I've taken a 3-4 hour break and my body's, cooled down. थोड़े niggles or stiffness और ये सारी चीजें आ गई हैं. So I have to make sure that in that break, you don't really rest in a decathlon for 2 days. बोलने के लिए है, but in the middle of those, after the morning session, you go to the hotel room, flush out जो भी मसाज वगैरह कराना है, replenish liquids because you've lost a lot of liquids, खाना अच्छे से खाना. So those are all carb rich खाना. So those are all things that we do between events. Coming back to the high jump, to make sure that you have a thorough warm up, do your drills, that sort of thing. क्योंकि अब body ठंडी हो गई, even though the weather temperature is hot, you want to make sure that you do things to keep the body का core temperature up. Going back to the other scenario, जैसे US में था, you start short put खत्म करते ही आधे घंटे में high jump पे, वहां पे what's most important for someone like me is I'm going to have plenty of time before my turn to jump comes, because average decathletes are jumping anywhere from 190 to 2 meters के बीच में. I don't even start at that height. So I need to make sure कि मैं जब start करूंगा उसके बीच में, और जो मेरे को इतना आधे पौने घंटे का रेस्ट मिला है, उसमें मैं अपने वार्म अप को कैसे मैक्सिमाइज करूं कि मैं ज्यादा वार्म अप पहले ना कर लूं या फिर बाद में ना करूं, because sitting around for anybody is going to make you tight and sore, especially more so if you've done 3 events in the morning. So that's where the strategy for me comes into the picture. कि किसी ने देखा होगा जैसे कि interstate में my starting height in the high jump was 199. I've never started at 199, but then there's more like a safety mechanism कि यार 199 में 1-2 jump लेके देखो कैसे वो हो रहा है, and then as you go up you can pass heights always. So that was the whole plan for the high jump, and especially in the high jump is where I always get cramps. तो उसको थोड़ा manage करके देखना कि कैसे मैं cramp ना हूँ. So those are all just things that go in the mind before even the start of the event, and once the event starts it's just a normal game. हाई जंप में आपको जैसे भी ऊपर नीचे पास करना है आप कर सकते हो. डिकैथलॉन में सिर्फ 3-3 सेंटीमीटर के इंक्रीमेंट पे चलता है हाई जंप का भी बार. सो यू हैव टू नो व्हेन टू पास, व्हेन टू नॉट पास, एंड देन आई थिंक दैट्स हाउ द हाई जंप गोस फॉर मी.
Yeah, so obviously the last event of the day, but 400 meters might just seem very simple, just one round of the ground, but there's a lot of 400 meter athletes say it's very, very tactical, probably one of the most difficult events on the athletics. What did you feel like? Because I think there's a lot of mind game for 400 meter phase. Like, you tell me what.
I think the 400 meters is definitely one of the tougher races, because we think that it's an all-out sprint, but it's actually not. क्योंकि 200 में क्या होता है कि you have to be very tactical, or I guess very self-centered with respect to what pace you're running for the first 200 meters, because everybody, irrespective of if you're a world record holder or if you're whoever you are, 300 मीटर के बाद सभी लोग टाइट होते हैं, सभी लोग, everybody gets fatigued, everybody is going to start building up lactic acid. The whole point of the goal is who goes out fast enough in the first 300 to be able to hold that pace in the last, because everybody's going to get tight after eventually, right? So for me, there's an ideal range pace that I try to hit, because in my workouts that's the pace that I've achieved. If I have somebody faster in the lanes outside, let's say for example I'm in lane 3 like the interstate, which is in the bang in the center, जो अच्छे एथलीट्स होते हैं उनको बीच का लेन मिलता है ताकि उनसे अंदर वाले पेस हो सके और वो बाहर वालों से अपना पेस ले सके, एंड दे कैन एमर्ज विक्टोरियस, ताकि फिनिश लैप में वो परफेक्ट पिक्चर आए कि 3 पीछे 2 आगे. एंड सो the best athletes always get lane 3, 4, 5 somewhere in there. So luckily at interstates, I got lane 3 and I knew I can use the guy at lane 8, lane 7 to catch up because I know nobody's going to run as fast as I am. I'm a strong 400 meter guy. So I know that I need to catch that guy at lane 8 as soon as I can so that I know I've covered everybody in the race and I'm in the lead even before I get to the 200 meters. अब यही अगर मेरे लेवल के एथलीट्स से मुझसे अच्छे एथलीट्स मेरे से बाहर वाली लेन में होंगे, आई कांट डू दैट मिस्टेक ऑफ ट्राइंग टू कैच द गाय इन लेन 8 बिकॉज आई रन आउट ऑफ ऑल माय रिजर्व्स इवन बिफोर आई रीच द 200 मीटर. उसके बाद फिर मेरे लिए एक मौत की घड़ी हो जाएगी बाकी 200 मीटर भागने के लिए. सो दैट्स वेयर आई थिंक द टैक्टिक्स कम्स इनटू द पिक्चर एंड इन द डिकैथलॉन आई गेस not so much so compared to somebody in the open 400 where everybody is equally positioned in the 400. तो वहां पे शायद ज्यादा वो हो जाता है. But then even in the decathlon I have to be honest to my pace. I have to run the pace that I am capable of, especially for the first two so that I can pull in the last 200. So from that respect I think it's a very tactical race and it's definitely hard. After you finish the 400 you're brought to your knees. तो उसके बाद फिर वो आपने उठना ही बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट हो जाता है कि उठो, चलो वार्म डाउन भी करना है, उसके ऊपर से फिर घर भी जाना है और अगर डोप टेस्ट हो गया तो वहां बैठे रहो 4 घंटे तक एंड देन यू गो टू द विलेज और whatever, go to your hotel room. Next morning you start at 7 a.m. So for 7 a.m. you have to wake up at 4 a.m. So those are all things that you have to think about right after the 400. You don't even have to sit and brood about कि day 1 कैसे गया या फिर यार थकान हो रही है. So those are all things that you can't think about during the competition.
And that's exactly what I was going to come to next, Tejaswin, because 400 के बाद end of day's play, I don't know how much energy is left inside you to even like do basic things. अगर जो आपको कमरे तक चल के जाना है तो उतनी भी एनर्जी बचती है या नहीं, I don't know. So between that event and the next morning, what do you do? How do you kind of conserve energy or kind of एक हम बोलते हैं ना rest and recover? वो कैसे होता है?
So like I said, I mean, रेस्ट तो होता ही नहीं है 2 दिन के गैप में, तो बस बोलने के लिए है कि यू गेट अ रेस्ट पीरियड जैसे कि 3 इवेंट के बीच में मिल गया या फिर बिटवीन डेज यू हैव एन अपॉर्चुनिटी टू कैच योर ब्रेथ, बट यू स्टिल हैव टू कंटिन्यू with the process of recovery because it just doesn't happen if you go to bed. It's not going to happen. Next morning you're going to be stiff as a rock. So right after the competition is done, I think the real recovery starts 15 minutes in that 15-minute window right after you finish the 400. Because it's really important to make sure that you eat something, some high carb source, could be a banana, could be some sort of a sandwich. You have to make sure that you get something down your throat within those first 15 minutes after you complete that 400 meter race. क्योंकि तब recovery सबसे ज़्यादा expedite होगी. So and usually that's the period when you can't even drink water क्योंकि उल्टी आ जाती है क्योंकि you can't take anything in your body. So you have to really force feed yourself. Make sure you get some sort of a cool down. थोड़ा सा एक lap ही ले लिया, कुछ भी कर लिया. You want to make sure that you get something done. Otherwise the lactic acid is going to be stuck in your body and the next morning you're going to feel it miserably. Try to go get a massage done. If you can jump in an ice bath, वो सब कर सकते हो. The recovery modality starts right after you finish the 400. You can't just sit and talk with your teammates. क्या दिन कैसा गया, आज high jump में ये हो गया. No, you just don't have the opportunity to do that like a individual event competition. So once that's done, and this is not something that I'm like being ऐसे मैं कंप्लेन नहीं कर रहा हूँ. एवरी ओलंपिक एथलीट हैज टू डू दिस. इवन एट द ओलंपिक गेम्स दिस इज हाउ इट गोस. सो दे हैव टू डू इट. वंस दे कंप्लीट इट, दे गो टू द गेम्स विलेज व्हिच इज probably some ways down from the athletics track. Go there. Once they get there, it's already whatever. Because usually the 400 meters always in the evening at about 7-8 p.m. because that's prime television time. तो उस समय सबको दिखाने के लिए it's always at that time. उसके बाद फिर आप जाते हो. Once you finish, with your activities at the track. Let's say for example, if you have to take a dope test that day, suddenly आपका नाम आ गया, randomly आपको pick कर लिया sample देने के लिए. You have to sit there for 3 hours. You don't have an option, right? You can't say कि recovery कर रहे हैं decathlon के लिए. वो बोलेंगे भाई देना है तो देना है, खत्म. So then you sit there, wait for the dope sample to be collected. Then you go to the hotel room. By the time you get there, it's already 11. You want to make sure you have a heavy dinner full of carbs. Pasta खा लिया या rice खा लिया, ऐसे कुछ कर लिया. When you sleep for whatever 3-4 hours, that's when the recovery happens. But उसके लिए आपको setup करना बहुत जरूरी है. So once you have your dinner, go to bed, maybe get another massage or so, whatever. Next morning, let's say for example, like we were saying, my race was at 7 at interstate. I can't afford to wake up at 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. because I have to get my body ready at 7 a.m. to perform at peak 100% output. तो उसके लिए मुझे कम से कम 4 बजे 4:30 बजे उठना है so that I can move around, stretch around, get whatever I can do, all that sort of thing. So उसके बाद फिर you go to the track, you do your hurdle specific warm up and then you hit the ground running at 7 a.m. and you have to run the hurdles. So that's how you maximize the recovery process between days.
Right. Tejaswin, you've come back to the track at like 7 a.m. or whatever it is in the morning. How are you training now for the 110 meter hurdles, which, I mean, you already done all of the things before. Your body is probably very, very tired.
So again, I mean, the cycle starts back up where you get to the track at whatever 5 a.m. for the 110 meter hurdles. अब उसका कैसा है कि it's a little bit more technical. And there's this saying in the decathlon community कि भाई day 1 is for the athletes and day 2 is for the decathletes. क्योंकि day 1 तो जो भी बहुत अच्छा एथलीट है वो कर सकता है, मतलब एक अच्छा हाई जंपर है, अच्छा is a strong fast athletic guy, he can do it. Day 2 is all technical events. It starts with the 110 meter hurdles, you have the discus, you have the vault, you have the javelin. Those are all 4 heavyweight events जहाँ पे पूरा सब कुछ technically based है. And it's all the more challenging क्योंकि वो technically आपको execute करना है perfectly, but you are fatigued to the core. तो आप उसको कैसे करते हो, वही असली challenge है. That's why day 2 is for the decathletes. So the beginning of the day, 110 meter hurdles, you start off with a thorough warm up because now you just don't have to sprint. You have another 10 set of barriers which are all the way up to your hip. तो उनको कैसे क्रॉस करना है, तो उसके लिए you have to do a thorough warm up. Make sure your groin, hamstring, your hips are loose, which they are not after running the 400. उसने make sure कर दिया 400 ने कि you are extremely tight and fatigued. तो उसको कैसे आप lose करते हो, you get used to the feeling of competing fatigue. So hurdles के लिए तो किसी ना किसी जैसे तैसे तरह you warm up and run the race. But then comes the discus. Even I'm jumping the gun a little bit. आप मुझसे पूछेंगे discus के बारे में, but I'm just wanting to talk about the discus before we go further. The discus is mutually agreed upon as the toughest event in the decathlon, not because of anything else, but because of the fact that every event before that and after that is a very, very explosive, quick, fast event. The discus is a very slow, long kind of an event where you cannot afford to be quick, fast, because then you lose the disc in the net. Again, you only have 3 throws. If something happens in the first throw, now all you have is 2 throws to make sure that you put up a score. 2 throw अगर खराब हो गए, एक नेट में चला गया, एक आउट ऑफ सेक्टर चला गया, all you have is 1 throw left in which your whole decathlon score depends. जो पूरे दिन का आपने day 1 का मेहनत किया, चाहे आपने 5000 पॉइंट भी बनाए, it doesn't matter if you foul all 3 in the disc the next day. So the discus is a very dreaded event के सब लोग थोड़ा सा उसके लिए decathletes डरते हैं कि यार वो event एक बार हो जाए तो then pole vault we'll get to, but then that's how the discus and the hurdles in the morning start.
I think we might be getting ahead of ourselves here, but it's interesting that you mentioned that discus is a very different and a dreaded event. I guess when you say that most of the events on day 1 are explosive, in a way short put is also an explosive event. Like, I mean, अगर जो देखने के लिए हम देखें तो शायद वो और discus थोड़ा सा similarities रहेगा because it's very different to the other track events and stuff. But if you were to compare that to what happens in discus, when you say it's a slow event, what exactly do you mean by that?
So short put is a very, very explosive. I mean, all these events are very explosive, but then comparatively short put में आपने ये देखना है कि there's barely 1 or 2 decathletes who do the rotational technique. All decathletes do the glide technique, which is, they start from a linear angle and then they throw the ball because 1, it's very easy compared to the rotational component of it. And then 2, none of the guys are throwing over 20 meters in the shot in a decathlon. So their goal is to salvage that event, get to whatever 14, 15 meters. In the discus, 1, you have the rotary component, but then secondly, it's all about being long and rangy in the disc so that you can catch the disc behind you. Instead of shot में तो ball यहाँ से आता है, लेकिन disc में क्या है कि you have to rely on your wingspan so that you can catch the disc behind you at release. पावर पोजीशन जो लास्ट का पोजीशन होता है वो तो सेम होता है, डिस्क यहाँ पीछे होता है, जैवलिन यहाँ पीछे होता है, शॉर्ट पट यहाँ आगे होता है. But then to get to that point, it's slow, long, and reachy compared to something like a short put or a javelin where you still have to run fast, or या फिर वो पीछे से glide लेके आप आगे आते हो and then you get the ball under you and throw the ball. So from that respect, when I said that it's a longer or a slower event, that's what I meant. अब बाकी आप शॉर्ट पट को बोलोगे तुम तो धीरे फेंकते हो, तो आप गलत इंसान को देख रहे हो. मेरा शॉर्ट पट मेन इवेंट है नहीं है, तो आप मुझे देख के धीरे फेंको करके बोल रहे हो, तो मेरी शायद बस की उतनी है कि मैं धीरे ही लगता हूँ. तो आप मुझे मत कंपेयर कीजिए शॉर्ट पटर से.
The next, of course, is pole vault. And you say discus is the dreaded event. I don't know how you guys pull off pole vault because itna sara kuch hone ke baad to have that energy to kind of leap over a bar that's like sky high. How do you guys manage that when you are already so much, 1.5 days into the event? And what's the mindset at that point?
Absolutely. Discus to hai ye one of the hardest events. Uske baad pole vault is another event where you have that risk of no heighting the competition and then just going out of the competition. Wash out हो जाता है, ऐसे बोलते हैं. So in the vault, I think it's again very, very technical event. You have to be fresh. You have to run fast. The pole doesn't do anything to throw you over the bar. वो misconception है कि भाई लटक के कूद जाओगे तो हो जाएगा. नहीं, पोल कुछ नहीं करता है. तुम्हारे को तेज भाग के पोल को प्लांट करना है, तभी वो उतना रेस्पॉन्ड करेगा. So decathletes or even, Olympic athletes, they carry a set of 10, 12, 8 poles in their bag. Each pole has a different purpose कि भाई अगर आज बारिश हो गई, आज अगर headwind आ रहा है, आज अगर tailwind आ रहा है, because then that changes the run at the speed at which you run and attack the pole into the box. और उससे आपका पूरा डिटरमिन होता है कि आपको हाइट कितनी मिलेगी, बिकॉज द पोल आपने ये तो सोचना है कि यस यू कैन दिस अगेन. सो आई मीन आई वांट टू डाइव अ लिटिल बिट इनटू द पोल वॉल्ट हियर विद रिस्पेक्ट टू व्हाट द पोल्स आर एंड व्हाट द मीनिंग ऑफ ईच पोल इज. तो देयर इज 3 कंपोनेंट्स दैट गाइड द पोल कि भाई एक पोल दूसरे पोल से कैसे डिफरेंशिएट कर सकते हैं. वन इज द लेंथ ऑफ द पोल. There's this thing called the weight of the pole that it can handle. अगर आप उसको बिल्कुल टॉप से पकड़ें और अपने नॉर्मल स्पीड से जाके उसको प्लांट करें तो बिना वो स्नैप किए कितना वेट ले सकता है. एंड देन यू हैव द फ्लेक्स नंबर विच इज अगर वो उतना वेट ले सकता है तो कितना वो बेंड करेगा compared to another pole which is of a higher flex number. The higher the flex number, the more it will bend. The lower the flex number, the less it will bend. So now अब आप बोले कि भाई तो कम से कम flex number में लेके जाके प्लांट करके कर क्यों नहीं देते. करना तो मैं भी वही चाहता हूँ because that's the ultimate goal every pole vaulter wants to do is get on a bigger pole which is a lower flex number so that it's more rigid which is going to throw you more. क्योंकि ऐसा नहीं होता कि जितना ज्यादा बेंड करेगा उतना ज्यादा ऊपर आएगा. वो सिर्फ बाहुबली मूवी में दिखाते हैं, असली में ऐसा नहीं होता. So now you have that risk of one, the pole breaking if you don't get on the right pole, or 2, you have the risk of if you get on a pole that's too stiff for you, it's not going to throw you inside the pit, it's going to throw you on the other side, which is how you have pole vault accidents. और वो आपको रनवे की तरफ फेंकेगा 5 मीटर तो बस उसके बाद आपका पोल वॉल्ट क्या सारा करियर ट्रैक का खत्म हो जाएगा. So that's why the pole vault is so interesting because it's a pure physics problem कि let's keep your run consistent. Even the standards go back and forth unlike the high jump where the standard stays the same. तो उस component को manage करना so that you can get your peak height on top of the bar. You have a different pole each time depending on the conditions, depending on how you're running. So it's a perfect physics problem जिसको solve करने में कई लोग को interest लगता है, कई लोग उससे डरते हैं. And then that's how people jump really high bars if you're just able to put 2 and 2 together. So pole vault उस respect में बहुत interesting है and it's a very very scoring event just like the high jump. For every bar you make, you get so many more points compared to, let's say, for example, you have to throw the shot, you have to throw it 50, 60 centimeters farther just to make the same points as if you jump another bar in the pole vault. So, very strong event. But again, you have that risk of, like we talked about, कि आप fatigued होते हो, this is already your 7th event and, you can't run with the same intensity, same force as somebody else who's just doing the pole vault event. So, that's how you see a lot of people bowing out. Perfect example is Dan O'Brien in 1992. Before the Olympic Games, so Dan versus Dave का जब हुआ था Reebok का, तो Dan O'Brien bowed out because he no-highted in the pole vault before the 1992 Olympics. उस साल उसने आगे जाके world record किया, but then he couldn't go to the Olympic Games because he no-highted in the trials. So again, once you do the pole vault, you know कि चलो अब तो decathlon complete हो जाएगी क्योंकि javelin में foul होने का क्या ही chance है. 1500 तो भागनी है, वो आपके दिल के ऊपर है. तो once you get done with the pole vault, you know that okay, now you'll be able to complete it without getting washed out. So.
Yeah, so obviously the next is the javelin. But even before going there, I'm like really tempted to ask because since you've done high jump, there's this surreal feeling of you just like flying over the bar. But what do you feel when you are that height? Like what happens? What goes in your mind? Like
in the vault, the pole does a lot of things for you if you do things right. But at the same time, I think the best feeling of pole vault is not when you're going up, but when you're coming down. क्योंकि तब आप देख सकते हो कितने ऊपर से आप नीचे गिर रहे हो. जब ऊपर चढ़ रहे हो तो आप बार को नहीं देखते. You have to look above and you have to focus on your arms and all this technique. But once you get off the pole on the way down, that's when you're like, oh wow, I'm actually falling down, and you can look what people are doing and you're still coming down from 4 meters. I mean, I'm coming down from 4 meters. Mondo's coming around from 6 meters. तो वो तो उसके पास तो पूरे दुनिया का टाइम होगा, एक चाय वाय पी के भी नीचे आ सकता है, तो उसके पास इतना सारा टाइम है. So I think that's the best part कि एक जब पोल क्लियर हो जाता है and then when you're coming down, I think that's a great feeling. I really enjoy it. Coming down from 4 meters, which means nothing, but eventually, hopefully, I can get up to 5 meters.
ऐसे कुछ पूरा से टाइम फ्रीज हो जाता है क्या?
बहुत अच्छा लगता है, क्या ही बताऊं मैं आपको. मैं डिस्क्राइब नहीं कर सकता, शायद आपको करना पड़ेगा. मैं पोल लेके आता हूं आपके लिए.
वो थोड़ा फ्लेक्स वाला ज्यादा वाला लाना पड़ेगा. ज्यादा फ्लेक्स वाला वेट वाला मिलता है. So yeah, of course, javelin. After you hit your personal best at interstate 52, and I think a message पहुंच गया था to your best friend and of course Olympic champion Neeraj Chopra, and he said that अच्छा किया है. तो also first, yeah, did you have a chat with him?
नहीं, I haven't had a chat with him about the javelin क्योंकि अभी तक तो मैं 48-47 मीटर्स फेंक रहा था. जो फेंक रहा उसका आधा था, आधा भी नहीं पहुंच रहा था, तो तब तो बहुत ज्यादा शर्म आ रही थी. अब कम से कम मैं आधे से ज्यादा हो गया हूं, तो now I can at least be, once I join the 50 meter club, I feel a lot stronger about my prospects in the javelin. So now I can definitely share my video with him and be like, hey, can you critique my video? उससे पहले तो बहुत बेइज्जती वाली बात थी, 40 मीटर भी नहीं जा रहा तो मैं क्या ही पूछता, उससे क्या बताएगा. So I think before we get carried away, Javelin का ये है कि it's again very similar to the high jump. You have that penultimate step which leads into the block step, which is your takeoff leg or the block after which you release the javelin. So at the interstate competition, for example, you might have seen a lot of athletes taking that long Neeraj Chopra kind of approach and wrapping the javelin around. And on the other hand, you might have seen me just take 7 steps and throwing it, and I was still getting close to those guys. So the thing with the javelin is you have to understand that it's a very, very technical event with respect to the weight of the implement and the shape of the implement. The implement is not very heavy at all. It's only 800 grams. But at the same time, the shape is so awkward कि उसको आप क्रिकेट बॉल की तरह नहीं फेंक सकते. 800 ग्राम का वो है, तो the shape so weird कि उसको आपने टिप में यदि आप फेंक दोगे, so it'll the same javelin with the same intensity has the capability of going to 60 meters or to going to 45 meters. So the range is so wide if you don't throw it through the tip. So the whole goal for me was to keep the javelin already all the way back so that I don't waste time bringing it from close to my eyes to all the way back and then throwing it and all that sort of thing, which Neeraj or somebody of his caliber can afford to do because that's what they do every day in practice. As a decathlete, you have 9 other things to worry about. So you can't spend a lot of time training for the javelin, doing the javelin, and the nature of the javelin is very different compared to like a shot put, which you can pick up and throw every day. With the javelin, you cannot because it's so hard on the body with respect to the knees and, elbow, shoulder. So वो सब होने के chances, so why would you risk it when you already have 9 more events? तो javelin का फंडा यही है कि बहुत सिंपल है कि कम से कम एफर्ट में ज्यादा से ज्यादा आप कितना थ्रो कर सकते हो, वही गोल रहता है. बिकॉज देन ऑल्सो कंसिडरिंग द फैक्ट दैट यू आर सो टायर्ड एंड ऑल दैट सॉर्ट ऑफ थिंग, all you have to do is not get hurt so that you can get through to the 1500 and finish the race. So javelin का थोड़ा सा वैसे ही हम अप्रोच करते हैं उसको जब.
And obviously the 1500 meters, the last event, and I think as you said at the interstate also you were hugging each other, drenched in sweat, and just the whole feeling of coming to the end. Just take us through the 1500 meters.
So even before you get through the javelin, after you take your second throw, उसके बाद एक feeling आने लगता है यार अब तो एक ही थ्रो बचा है, 1500 भागने 1500 भागने 1500. So you have that feeling of cramping or not cramping but butterflies in your stomach. तो एक बार वो javelin खत्म हो जाता है, तीसरी तो हो जाती है like चलो अब तो यार 1500 आ रहा है, 15 मिनट में आ रहा है, 14 मिनट में आ रहा है. So you start doing a countdown in your brain. Usually at this point, every decathlete who's ever existed takes out their decathlon calculator and sees whatever their milestone is. Let's say, for example, for someone it's 8,000 points, for someone it's to break the world record, someone national record, or for me in this instance was to qualify for the Asian Championships. You always pull out that calculator and see how hard or what pace do you have to run the 1500 meter race in order to achieve that benchmark. So usually there's this pace that comes out. You're like, okay, चलो अगर मैं इतने की 400 लेके चलता हूँ तो इतने मैं 1500 में भाग सकता हूँ करके, you do some sort of a calculation, so that you don't go out too fast or too slow in the race. So that's what I did right before the 1500 was, once I got through that butterflies in the stomach feeling, pulled out my calculator, saw that, okay, I needed whatever 450 to get the Asian standard and something like 428, 427 to get the national record. So that's when I could have taken that first option of running 429, 428, which usually I personally think it shouldn't be. I mean, it is hard for me, but it's not that I can't get it. But then in my mind, my whole goal was, okay, step 1 is to qualify for the Asian Championships, and God forbid if something happens, if I start cramping or something, I don't want to stop in the middle of the race and even, अपने qualification के chances से भी हाथ धो के बैठना. So I didn't want that to happen. So then I thought, okay, I'll take the easier option of just running a 440, 445, which I know I could have done very comfortably, and I did it. So उसका option लिया, and then I got through the 1500 meter race. But between the race, जैसे आपने बोला कि, we had that incident of the other decathletes really wanting to come together, help me, get me through that qualification mark, somebody pacing me throughout the race. There was one guy positioned right behind me and talking in my ear throughout the race, बोल रहा था कि हो जाएगा, करोगे, उसको पकड़ के चलो, यहाँ चलो, अभी इतने टाइम में यहाँ होना चाहिए. So there's somebody always, in your ear. So those are things that I don't think normal people do in normal courses of competitions, and these are all special moments that I think you just have to cherish those moments.
स्पोर्ट्स में तो स्लेजिंग होगा ना कि अरे जैसे होगा नहीं, यहाँ तो उल्टा है.
यहाँ बिल्कुल ही उल्टा था.
Right. TJ, just one last question from my side before we wrap this up. I wanted to understand, you've gone through this grind of 10 events now over the course of 2 days, all of which have tested different aspects of you as an athlete. After the second day, when you are done, how many days of rest do you take? Have you heard of stories where athletes have been like completely blanking out after these 10 events back to back to back?
No, absolutely. That's a great question because, even fundamentally thinking of doing 10 events in a span of 2 days is a lot, and capping it off with the 1500 without any sleep. Because sleep to bolne ki baat hai, you don't really get sleep between events. Because even if you have everything prepared, you're ready for day 2, you're still nervous that you want to do well. So after the end of the day, by the time you get to the javelin throw, at that point, your body is starting to shut down. And now you're on caffeine, you're on Red Bull just to try and get you through that 1500 meter race. Once that's done, you're really tired, you want to sleep, but then the caffeine keeps you up and you can't sleep. So aap aise ho rahe hote ho right after the 1500 meter race, and even that night you can't sleep. Let's say, for example, you had a good meet and you go out, celebrate, wo sab cheezein hoti hai, so you just cannot sleep. So from a periodization standpoint, even elite decathletes, you don't see anybody doing more than 3 or 4, worst case 5 decathlons in a given calendar year, because that's only how much the body can take. So how we train for the decathlon is by doing individual events at different competitions or even in practice. So that the whole goal of a decathlon is, one, the first decathlon of the year is you do one just to test everything out, put everything together. Second one is usually your national qualifier. The third, fourth, fifth ones are usually at championship meets, in my case, which would be Asian championships or Asian games, that sort of thing. So that's how you prepare for the decathlon and do it. This is going to be really interesting for me with the Asian championships in 3 weeks is, how am I able to maximize, like you said, after you do the 1500 meter race, उसके बाद तो motivation नहीं रहती कि sports करने की, you start questioning कि मैं क्यों कर रहा हूँ, क्या, you don't even want to go back to the track for the next 3-4 days. It's just so, because you've peaked emotionally and you've kept that peak up for 2 days, and now you're just physically exhausted, mentally drained. You don't want to do that again for at least a considerable period of time. In my case, it's usually about a week or so. I didn't want to even go back to the track. तो एक बार धीरे धीरे वो प्रोसेस खत्म होता है, which is very normal. Then you get back to the track and start warming up a little. You have to start back up again as if you're coming back from injury. So things start picking up very fast. But then this week, for example, I didn't do anything for the last 3-4 days. Today I have some sort of a discus session, जो body में बहुत easy होगा. I'll do a short put session. So these are all things that are easier events, not like a 110 meter hurdles or a high jump session. So just touching on things. Considering Asian championships in 3 weeks, it's not that I can do a lot at this point. I can't do any technical changes. There's 10 things to worry about. I don't want to overcomplicate things. So the whole goal would be, how much of recovery can I maximize between now and the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, so that come Asian championships, I'm ready and primed, and the 11.2s and the 7.30s change into 7.60s and 10.8s, 10.7s. That's where I'm going to get my bulk of my points. I'm not going to get the bulk of my points by worrying about how I can get my 52 meter javelin to 60 meters. क्योंकि वो तो इतने साल से चलता रहा है, वो आगे भी चलता आएगा. My whole goal before the Asian Championships in 3 weeks would be to make sure that I'm well rested, recovered, because I can't train a lot. So वो सब चीजें करके just be ready for that competition and just go through the whole 10 events again.
So as you said, there's a month left. So how do you plan to
3
train?
weeks.
Yeah, less than a month left. So how do you plan? And you were probably telling us that you are going to JSW's Inspire Institute of Sports Facilities. So what is your plan now?
So that's exactly right. My plan is to go to the JSW Institute in Bellary, which is the Inspire Institute of Sport, and make sure that I sort my recovery out, because like I said, I can't do a lot of training between now and the Asian Championships. But then when I get there, firstly, I will not have access to my family cooking and family food, which I don't want when I go and get ready for the Asian Championships, and I'll have access to more nutritious and food conducive to high performance. क्योंकि घर में से होता है कि थोड़ा घी डाल के खा लो, क्यों घी डाल के खाना है, नहीं उससे जॉइंट्स वगैरह लुब्रिकेटेड रहेंगे. जी मैं गाड़ी हूँ, क्योंकि मुझे लुब्रिकेशन की जरूरत है, नहीं चाहिए मुझे घी. So those are all things that you have to on a constant basis, especially back home in India, you have these tussles. But I want to get to an environment where I can just focus on my recovery. There's going to be, all sorts of access to physios, masseuses, or cryotherapy, ice therapy, just all sorts of things that I can use on my body to make sure that I'm well recovered, well rested before the Asian Championships. And that's going to be my whole goal at IIS. Once I'm back from there, I should feel like a human being getting ready for the Asian Championships. And that's the goal for the next 3 weeks.
Amazing. Thanks a lot, Tejaswin. You've been very kind with your time and also the way you've taken us through each and every event of Decathlon. I think, जैसे Andrew ने at the top of the episode कहा, I don't think अभी हम में से कोई ये mistake करेगा कि हम लोग Decathlon high jump या Decathlon javelin को ignore करके we'll, I think, be focused on the event ekdam se, and looking forward to how it goes at the Asian Championships as well as Asian Games for you. So we wish you all the best for that. Thank you for coming once again, and thank you all the listeners. We'll be back with a fresh episode of Game Time next week.
You were listening to Express Sports by the Indian Express. This week's show was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Podcast and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.